At presidential inaugurations, poets are usually a supporting cast for political figures, but this year the strongest impression may have been left by Amanda Gorman reading her poem, The Hill We Climb. It's a lesson about the importance of poetry in public life, which also describes a collaborative series between public poets from two very different states organized by Mass Humanities and Mississippi Humanities. Joining us is one of the participants, the poet laureate from Worcester, Massachusetts, Juan Matos. Thank you very much for being with us, Juan.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Such an honor.
Well, I want to start with this person that many poets might be envying right now. Amanda Gorman, she's so young. She's a household word. What happened when she read that poem at that inauguration?
Well, I think it was a call for the humanities. And I think that all around the world, we were so happy, so touched by such a wonderful young writer. And the thematic and the way she presented the poem, a poem so needed in that particular time, in this particular time, uh, raised a lot of expectations. And one of the things that I consider the most is the impact that uh, that particular performance has in young students, writers, and uh, the people who love poetry. It's a powerful message, right on time.
Well, you didn't just start loving poetry when you heard her, but what about going back to the very beginning for you when you were growing up? How did that happen?
Well, I was fortunate enough to have wonderful um, elementary teachers. My mother included. She was my teacher when I was in fourth and fifth grade, and those days. And in the Caribbean, Latin American, there is a lot of tradition of um, incorporating poetry into the reading and the subjects. And I was touched because the drama and the art used in schools in those days were phenomenal. And I wish that we might continue to do that in these days. I know it's difficult, budgeting, politics, all these things, but poetry got me when I was in elementary school and never left my life. Yeah.
Uh, of course, the series that's going on with Mass Humanities and Mississippi Humanities, one of the things you're focused on is how poetry reflects where you live, where you work, where you write. What does that mean for you?
It means a lot. I think that we all need to pay tribute to our communities. Uh, I, I'm in love with Worcester City. I moved from New York to Massachusetts back in 1997, and I feel embraced both by Worcester Public Schools. At that time, the bilingual teachers and bilingual educators was needed a lot, and I feel embraced. And but not only that, but the diversity. And in my opinion, the way Worcester and many other cities embrace diversity is the key for the success that we might have in education and opening the doors to so many immigrants like me in the mainstream.
Well, when you've been teaching, you were working with students who are writing in the language of their native countries. These are countries outside the United States, but also translating into English. A lot of people who are not immigrants, they say, why do you keep speaking that first language? You got to be American. Why is it important to draw on that first language, those cultural roots?
It is important because it's all about the identity of the individual. It's a key component in the growing up as in their minds and in society. Once you know who you are, once you learn to value your own roots, then you will be able to appreciate others. Um, and as I mentioned before, being surrounded with uh, kids from all over the places, uh, embrace not only the learning but the socialization between kids. I remember in my days in the city of Worcester being a bilingual ESL shelter immersion teacher, even though when I myself am a language learner, but the kids see or the way I try and try and try to incorporate not only my native language and knowledge, but to embrace the new language, the mainstream language. It is important for them to being exposed to the English language, but at the same time, showing them that they were able to contribute with everything they have from their country, from the native language into the language acquisition. It's a wonderful component. I remember having students teaching at Goddard Elementary School. At some point, we have 87 different languages in a building. And then you see kids interacting each other at the cafeteria, out there at the yard, and then embracing English as a wonderful bridge for them to grow up in society. And as kids, it's a wonderful experience. But when they know that their contribution is also valuable, that when they don't feel that, okay, this is a language that is less than the English. No, when they feel empowered, they are most likely to learn the new languages, and not only to learn, but to incorporate and even assimilate the culture in which they are immersed now.
You know, when you write about your own life, I mean, you've gone from one part of the world to another. In Spanish, you have all of these writers who went into exile: Garcia Marquez, Vallejo,
Neruda.
Cortázar. So you're not alone. Why is it important to have that language to work with about, processing your own life?
It is important because, as I mentioned before, it's a key component of my identity. Uh, but I'm able to find out, for example, in Cortázar that you mentioned, I'm able to find out Walt Whitman in Cortázar. I'm able to find out Walt Whitman in Neruda. So the bridge of translation, the bridge of that the arts bring us, is all about for growing up and enjoying the arts. So when I found myself writing about my roots, um, I touch base with the history, because Latin American history has to do a lot with American history, although many of our own stories are not in the textbook of this country. But for instance, I grew up in a sugar mill industry. So my father and my uncles and my grandpa, and here is it was part of the South tradition, Louisiana, and then the African Americans who, once they were free, traveled to uh, the Caribbean, and we learn a lot from them, even the language. When we say Janiqueca, it comes from journey cake. The way we adapt all those things. Look at our baseball players. See? So everything is connected through history, and we as people, we learn from each other. We have learned so much from North America.
Coming
Uh,
back to Worcester, Guan, which also has some associations with poets: Elizabeth Bishop, Frank O'Hara, and Gertrude Halstead. Tell me about your interest in Gertrude Halstead.
well, I'm interested in her because I found myself a lot of connection. Number one, we are immigrants, and I admire the way she succeeded in life, being a survivor of the Holocaust herself and her family, and the quality of the poetry, the pure of the poetry, and the way that she teach us to raise up, even though when we are, in, in front of difficult situations. That's what I admire about her poetry. And as I mentioned before the interview, I'm planning to pay tribute to her. And I start working on translating into Spanish her work because I think that a wonderful voice and a wonderful poet like Gertrude need to be known by our fellows, not only in the literature field, but also in schools. We need that voice.
I have to confess, I read one of your poems in Spanish and English, and I almost hate to see it translated because it's so good in Spanish. La ilusión de la memoria. It sounds like an echo chamber in Spanish. It's wonderful.
Yes, La ilusión de la memoria, the illusion of memory. Uh, I wrote that poem uh, at the beginning of my economical exile, the way I call it, because even though when we fulfill our responsibilities in down there in my country, as everybody knows, in the middle of the 80s, because of the political situation in the Dominican Republic and all Latin America, there was guerrillas and all those things. I found myself in a way that even following my mom and my dad advice, you have to leave because you need to look for the future of your kids. And eventually we made it. We paid the price, but we made it. My three kids um, are educators in United States. I'm educated myself and coming without language. I didn't spoke English at all, even though when we took grammar classes, but it was difficult. But we made it, as well as my wife, who happens to be a dentist over there. And eventually we validate those academic requirements, and we were able to raise our kids. But we pay the price because our kids stood in the Dominican Republic for 4 years, and the separation of the family, things that we are seeing now, is absolutely difficult. In my way as a writer, when I wrote The Illusion of Memory, I remember that I said, well, that my life was, and like many immigrants, before and after. See, that man who came bring everything. Remember what I told you about our students. We have a lot of memories, we have a lot of history, we have our identity. And then even though when we hear this is the way that we can contribute in society. And I've been fortunate enough being an educator because working with migrant kids, it's giving me the opportunity to be not exactly a role model, but an inspiration. That I wish that I fulfill that, saying, look, as your parents, I came like you. The way you came, my children came in. And pushing and pushing and pushing for the language acquisition, it was one of the best reward that I ever had as an educator.
Well, thank you very much, Juan. And that is an important distinction. Finally, briefly, there's fourth part of the series between Mississippi and Massachusetts will be on tomorrow night at 7. Am I correct?
Yes, it's going to be so wonderful. I look
Great.
forward to share poetry and having this opportunity to share poetry with poets from different states is a wonderful experience. We're going to be great.
Well, thank you very much for sharing it with us as well.
Thank you so very much for having me, and I wish that tomorrow evening everyone enjoy poetry, and look forward. April is going to be National Poetry Month. It's going to be plenty of.
And you're getting us warmed up. Thank you very much for being with us. Juan Matos, the Poet Laureate from Worcester, Massachusetts.
Thank you for having me, Chris.